the structure of this is going to be similar in terms of let's tell us who you are, and we're going to talk a bit more detail about the games, the contribution that arts make. But actually, what is the difference? What does VFX art do? And we'll also, towards the end, we're going to ask what everyone thinks a technical artist does. That's a great artistic joke, by the way. Sorry, obviously, limited audience. So, Panache, tell us about yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Panache. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm currently a junior 3D artist at Adam Hawk Design. I've been there for just over a year and a half now, so I'm still very much a newbie to the industry. Prior to that, I was at Light VFX, where I worked for about 4 months under the same role, but that was mostly for film and advertisement. I moved to the UK in 2021 to pursue my master's in game art, so I have somewhat of a traditional educational background. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and this is my first panel. So yeah, I'm just super excited for this chat that we're going to have.
No, thank you, Panache. Zaya?
Hi, my name is Saya, and I am a lead environment artist at Rebellion, where I have been now 11 years. My original plan was maybe 6 months, but I liked it so much that I never left.
Sorry, it's so good to have a European staying with us, isn't it? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Eva. I'm a UI UX designer at Atom Hawk. Before that, I was at D3T, so they both work for hire companies, which means we offer services to other companies developing their games. I studied my BA in illustration, and then I did an MA in 3D after I kind of was like, what do I do with illustration? That's a very broad topic. And yeah, I love what I do.
No, thank you. It's great to have so many smiling faces, isn't it? And Gary, yeah, similar. Who are?
Yeah, hi, my name's Gary Noble. I'm a senior VFX artist at Lab 42. Before that, I was at Rebellion. Before that, at Radiant Worlds, as was. And then before that, I was in the film and television industry. I think basically Panache's speed ran my career. I've been in the computer games industry for 8 years. Before that, I was in the film industry for about the same amount of time, working in London for various Hollywood things.
Thank you, Gary. And Panache, so your role as a 3D artist, how does that sort of work? What does a day look like?
So to put it simply, I'm just asked to make game-ready 3D assets. That's a process that typically begins by taking a piece of 2D concept art. That would be a drawing, and then I have to realize that in 3D. I am very much a Maya user, so for those in the audience who use 3D Maya, that's my software of choice. So I will always have that open on a day-to-day. So I'll take that piece of 2D art, create a block out, move on to creating a high poly asset, as we call it, which is just a high resolution asset. And then the next step would be to optimize it so that it's usable in engine, which is a bit more technical as it is art. But I think it's just that mix of like art and technical aspects that I deal with on a day-to-day. Yeah.
And in terms of people who don't know, what do you mean when you say an asset? What is?
So basically, the game character that you see in the game, that would be classed as a character asset. It could be a gun. It could be like weapons, like different things that you see in the game. Yeah.
Thank you, Panache. And Zaya, as a lead as well, we're really interested in the skills around leadership in gaming as well, but obviously an environment artist as well. So talk us through a day in this sort of your life, please.
Okay. A lot of it is meetings, talking about art, so that the artists don't actually have to. Some of them are not best spent of time, but the decisions that come from there, I need to know the background so I can explain to the artists what direction we are taking. I am still expected to do art. Most of the time, I try to do the crappy job so that the artists don't have to, so just little optimizations here and there, so that they can get ownership and concentrate on bigger areas, because that's, of course, much more inspiring for them. I'd say a lot of my time is reviews and feedback, so artists will either ask for feedback, or it might have been a few days since I've seen their work, so I will just load up their work and take a look and give them feedback to each other. We're also very much encouraging them to feedback each other's work, so facilitating things like that, arranging spaces where they can do that. And then just normal mentoring, career growth, and scheduling. So it's kind of it's artist plus a producer role. So we look at the schedule and the budget, and once in a while a production will come over and ask what is going to be ready by this date. And then we usually go to the artists and we find out from them if their schedules are okay before we commit to anything. So some spreadsheets in addition to art.
Oh, that's great. And in terms of the environment aspect, for the people in the audience as well, what does that actually mean as well? In terms of
that means the entire world. So it depends on a studio. So you might have specialists who just do props. In our company, environment artist makes the props and builds the world that they go into. Sometimes we might have a lighting artist that builds the world lights and the skybox. VFX artists who will make stuff blow up, vehicle artists, weapon artists, of course, character artists. Sometimes a foliage artist is a separate role, material artists who just concentrate on material. So it depends on the project, how complicated it is, but for us it's a big deal. The autonomy is very important, that it's your level, you are in charge of it as one environment artist, so you have quite a lot of power to change what the player experiences.
Brilliant. I do think it's amazing that you sort of lead by example. You mentioned that you do the work that some people wouldn't necessarily want to do, top of their list. I find that in gaming more than in other sectors, where the leaders wouldn't ask you to do what they wouldn't do. It's a great example of good leadership.
Well, they get to do it. They have to know how to do it, but it's more because there's a lot of repetition that optimization can get really boring, and it's actually, if you have someone who is driven and wants to create something amazing, their work is better spent creating an interesting area, and I can just kind of pick and grab a couple of optimization tasks to do between my meetings. It just makes more sense. It's more efficient.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Eva, please explain, because this title, UI, UX, etc. A lot of people don't understand what it means, and it's useful to understand what your background and what you do on a daily basis, please.
Like, what are all those acronyms, right?
I know.
UI, UX, so UI is user interface, and then you've got user experience. They are, in a lot of games, not noticed. It's kind of an unglamorous job, really, when I say, oh, I designed the menus and the HUDs, like stuff that the player is not interested in seeing. And so a lot of my job can actually be about what don't we want to show as much as what we do want to show. And then it's a case of like taking the information, finding out what that information is, and then structuring it in a way that is helpful to the player and makes their experience immersive and fun, of course, because it's a game. So your UX side is taking that information. We'll put together what's called a wireframe, which is sort of like a very basic version of how a screen or a HUD might look, and like where the information is going to live, what happens when multiple pieces of information needs to happen at the same time. We don't want them to overlap. How's it going to look in German is always the question as well, when there's a really, really long string and we need to get it to not overlap. And then in an ideal world, it never actually works like that, we then take that to the UI step, which is making it look beautiful, giving it a style that kind of expresses the game without becoming cumbersome to it. And then we also have like kind of what I consider the third part, which is that implementation stage, which I feel can be like you end up jumping between them. The current project I'm working on, they're very much of a playtest culture, so we want to get things in as quickly as possible and see how it's working, see how the player is interfacing with it. And that can then lead to quite quick changes. So we can jump between all of those three stages very quickly, and it can be awesome sometimes because even when you put a design on a page and you're like, oh God, it looks great, like, let's do it. And then you put it in game and you're like, oh crap, like how does it animate? Like how often are we showing it? We want to bring the player's attention to this, but not obscure, like really vital. I work on a lot of FPS, and like that can be a lot of like, we need a lot of UI because players want to min-max like their character or whatever, but we also don't want to take them out of that like really fast-paced kind of environment. And it's like constantly finding that balance.
Brilliant, thank you. And then moving on to Gary. VFX, a lot of talk in the whole industry and beyond, is film, media, Netflix, etc. But again, what does a senior VFX artist actually do?
Yes, so
Please.
VFX, say blow things up. Essentially that's how it started.
Please don't say that.
The visual effects industry in film was originally the people who did the explosions and set things on fire safely and that sort of thing, and that's evolved in games to being particle systems and any other systems for fire and rain and smoke. And blood, if you're doing a particularly gruesome game where there's people getting shot or zombies getting shot and you want a lot of blood, it can get quite gruesome in that respect. But I think we also, one of my favorite parts of VFX is the environmental effects. So if you're walking through a beautiful environment, leaves gently falling from the trees, a little roll of slightly cartoony wind, whatever, kind of the things you might see in Zelda as you're walking through the grass, that sort of thing. That's us as well. I was thinking actually, just what the last panel was talking, it's quite similar to sound in that every now and then you want this big, impressive sting that people will notice, but most of the time you want just to add to the player's experience. So that's what we do.
And you're a senior, so what does that mean?
Obviously, there's you start off as a junior, you get to mid-level where you're kind of trusted and to get the job done. But when you reach senior, you're expected to be able to take tasks on yourself. You're expected to plan tasking. You're expected to be able to manage people. You might not have a large team. You might only have a couple of people talking to you, reporting to you. But you're expected to be able to manage people and proactively help other people that need help, and talk to the departments, make sure that the VFX department are doing what they can for the other departments, and that the other departments are working with you. So.
And Eva, a question for you. So what made you sort of choose the UI element in art? Was there any particular journey, any skills that you recognised in your early career?
Yeah, so I think I've never yet met a UI or UX designer who went and studied that. It's quite a niche one, which is why often when I come to these events and people are like, oh, I'm into UI, and I'm like, we'll hire you, because I can guarantee if you've got to this point, you're already good enough, right? So yeah, I started as a generalist. I made a game by myself in my master's. I highly recommend not doing that. Actually, the UI was terrible in that. No one ever go and find it, please. I might get fired. So I really enjoyed using Unreal as a renderer for assets and things. And so I taught myself that. Went in as a generalist, and I had the opportunity at my previous company where we had some downtime because of the nature of the work, where we get the projects in externally, that sometimes you have periods where there's not a lot happening. Your skills need to be matched correctly with the projects. So even if there are projects, it might be you know what, Eva's not the right person for this one. We need to wait for a better opportunity to come through. So to fill that time, essentially, I worked with our DevOps department, really, really talented guy called Ben, and sort of just made their internal tools at D3T just look a bit nicer. Honestly, look back on it now, you're like, oh, goodness, I made so many mistakes. But it was a great kind of sandbox for me to play around in it without having to do the sort of client-facing, oh my goodness, the player's going to play this kind of work. And I found that I really enjoyed it. It's like a big kind of puzzle that you have to put all the pieces together. And previous to that as well, I was doing a lot of optimization work. So anything that wasn't manually removing polygons from meshes was oh, this is crazy good. So, and then I moved on to work on Vampire the Masquerade Blood Hunt, where we had full ownership over some meta features. Kind of went from there.
Thank you. And then, Panisha, what advice would you give for people to get into 3D art? Any words of wisdom, please?
I'd say the most important thing for me is to try to replicate a studio environment as much as you can. Even if you're in uni, for example, you're going to have a lot of friends, classmates surrounding you. Surround yourself with people who are also into the same thing. Work together like you would when you're in a studio, because it's very valuable to get that feedback, that collaborative work ethic at a very early stage. And in terms of the actual skill set, I'd say it's very good to understand the fundamentals of art. You don't have to necessarily know how to draw, or like something that is very traditionally known as artistic, but just understanding like things like form and function, that really helps if you are then to become a 3D artist, because it is a unique skill set in that most people don't really think in 3D. And when you then start to try to make things from a 2D concept or a drawing, it's a completely different world. So I say try to understand things like form, function, and art fundamentals. And like I said as well, try to replicate a studio environment, work a lot at modeling. Repetition, I think, is very useful at something like this because it can get quite technical. And if you have specific software that you use, the more you use it, the more you start to understand that, yeah, it's very quick for me to do this instead of that. And you make like really fast decisions, and it will only help you as a 3D artist. Yeah.
Because of course we haven't got any concept artists, character artists. There's vehicle artists. It is amazing what is out there. But Zaya, similar, becoming a lead and your specialism around the environment. How did that? What advice would you give people to get into the environments?
Right now, I would say the thing that I look for most in applicants is either of like a fine art background, because it adds to your creativity. So those are the options. Like, you don't have to know how to draw. That's not important as long as you can think in an artistic way, because right now, like, you can generate materials very easily. You can even generate mesh easily. You can do photogrammetry where you're just replicating real world. We already have the tools to do this, but what we need artists for is to make stuff that doesn't exist. We don't need you to replicate a coffee maker. We want to hear, what do you think? What would be a coffee maker that is made 100 years in the future? What would that look like? It's about standing out like that. Like, you make something brand new. Otherwise, it is just replicating, which has its place. That's a different kind of an art, but that's what I usually look for, is sufficient technical ability, but like extraordinary creative ability, because you can teach a program in a week, but teaching someone how to think artistically or creatively is much harder.
And as a panel then, I mean, stick with you. Any ideas about how to be creative or become more creative? Because it must be inherent, but are there any things, you're next, Eva, don't worry, but is there any tips? Because it is, the industry's crying out for this still, isn't it? We want creative, we want more great games. Are there any
Quickly,
shortcuts?
I would say curiosity. Like, just research more stuff, even if it doesn't necessarily look cool. Find out why a machine looks like this, if it interests you. For me, it's travel. It is just seeing things made differently. What does foreign coffee shop look like? And then you have this visual library that coffee shop is not the first Google search result. It can be something so much more. And then when you start thinking that, never go with your first option. Always just go, that is starting point. It's never the goal.
Eva, any thoughts on that element of creativity?
Yeah, I maybe want to flip the script actually and say, well, being capital C creative isn't always the most vital thing to an artist. Like, I think in UI, I feel sometimes quite a mathematical brain, in that like it is just like a big puzzle. And so yes, obviously we're looking for like creative problem solving and things like that, but what is it that I'm trying to say? It's not the be-all and end-all. Sometimes it's about teamwork. Sometimes it's about asking the right questions. Sometimes it's about just iterating until you find that answer and just doing it over and over and over and over.
No, I think that's a very good answer. And Garrett, similar question to you, please, if that's okay, but also, what's the biggest bang you've done? What's the biggest?
The biggest bang? I've avoided the big explosions. I think we mentioned Gore before. I worked for Rebellion on Zombie Army, and one of the principal things I added to that was zombies' heads exploding, which in a variety of unusual ways, which was a lot of fun. In slow motion as well, of course, because Rebellion are renowned for those slow motion shots. But yes, I think for VFX artists, when I'm looking for, and I was hiring a year and a half ago, and what I noticed is that a lot of the time, it's essentially the same portfolio I'm seeing, which is one
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you. And now we're going to move on to the Q&A piece. So again, it's a great chance for technical questions rather than questions about your CV, which we can talk about afterwards. So I'll poorly throw the magic cube again.
So just thinking about modding games, things, specifically like Bethesda games, which have a lot of modding community. Is doing modding something that would aid you or a person in getting into that more creative parts that you seem to be, that you're involved in? And also, is it really annoying when people mod things to make them better, in inverted commas?
I mean, if you're looking for a creative role and you've added something creative to the game and you've made it look in the style of the game, and it doesn't immediately stand out as being awkward to the style of the game that you've modded, then as far as I'm concerned, you're already working at least at junior level. In VFX, if it works and it's a good mod, and you've shown your creative elements, then I think that's great. Yeah, that's definitely, make sure it's on your showreel.
Next question. Ready?
Is there like a certain software that you would choose to do something, or is it more up to your personal preference?
Yeah, let's.
Well, for 3D, there is specific software that you use for certain stages in the pipeline. So, for example, if you're texturing, you would use Substance Painter. I can't really think of anything else that you would want to use other than Substance. For 3D modeling, there are many options. You could use Maya, you could use ZBrush. So that part is really up to you and what you find comfortable. Like I said before, I'm a Maya guy. I'll have Maya open even if I'm not using it. That's how much I love that software. But yeah, it's pretty much up to you.
Anyone else want to add anything to that?
I mean, I use a lot of Photoshop myself, and you'll be, depending on the studio, you'll be using obviously a game engine, so it might be worth getting a little bit of experience in Unreal and Unities, just so you know how those work, especially with a specialized role like VFX, learning Niagara and VFX Graph.
Yeah. And that was Niagara, again, you said that?
Yeah, Niagara.
Just a really quick one that for us, it does not matter which 3D package you use. Use whatever you're comfortable with. If we use a different one, we'll train you in it. And same with game engines. We use our own engine. We don't expect anyone to know it. As long as you have experience in one of them, you'll understand them all. In terms of being an artist, you get it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And time for another one?
Yeah. Oh, and it's complete. When creating art, where do you? That was way too close to my mouth. Where do you recommend starting? Is there any specific thing you'd recommend drawing, or anything in particular, a specific environment?
Did you hear that too?
Yeah.
Any recommendations? Yeah.
Research, just dig out anything interesting you can about the topic, and I would say also develop the topic. I do not want to see one more Last of Us inspired, overgrown classroom, where obviously a lot of people, for example, in there, they have used Chernobyl. And when you Google Chernobyl classroom, you get the same picture. And all these portfolios, as mentioned, they end up looking exactly the same. So it's also sci-fi corridors. Like, don't put yourself in a position where you are competing against the same thing everyone else is doing unless you are the best one. And it's very unlikely that you will be. So I would say, think of a topic that interests you. And if it's just something generic, like a very common one, a floating temple on a little floaty island, just think, how can you make it look different? That's your starting point. Now think, how would you feel talking to someone about it? That you have to be passionate. When you're in an interview and someone asks, tell me about this piece, you can't just say, I don't know, I just made it. It has to be, let me tell you the story of how I discovered this and how I decided that this is the topic I want to work with. So first motivate yourself and find something special about it.
And adding to that, do a mood board, plan a color palette that you're working with. I think this is fairly generic for just beyond VFX as well. And what I really love is when you put that up on your ArtStation or whatever, underneath in the area where you can add comments and stuff, screenshots of your mood board, screenshots of your development process, screenshots of VFX Graph or whatever you use to actually make the effect, so that I can see your entire process, because that's so much better than just a single image. Yeah.
Is there anyone else got a question? There is one. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. I'll try and sort of wrap what I've wanted to ask into one question. Pretty straightforward. What kind of makes a portfolio stand out as being like obviously student work as opposed to work that's like a kind of quality that's prepared and ready for a professional setting, I guess?
Yeah, let's start.
I think for this one, you have to be honest with yourself. Like it's very easy to get a gauge of what is good art. You just go on ArtStation, you see a ton of art there. And for me personally, I kind of knew that my portfolio was ready because I compared it to like the people that have similar roles to the one that I wanted. So I'd say like just start off there, just be honest with yourself, give yourself that honest critique, because it can be very difficult to find people who are honest enough to tell you that your work is not at the level it's supposed to be.
Very good. Would you like to add some close?
Showing assets on a black background, having very basic lighting, not showing wireframes, because it's enough if you just show one wireframe. You don't have to show them all, just do one well-optimized one and show that. And usually unfinished work, undeveloped work, where it's a fair point that you have multiple modules to do when you are a student. But it is quite depressing to read it and say that, well, if I had time, this would have been great, but I posted it here anyway. So that's a big problem, unfinished work.
Yeah, obviously going back a bit to the 3D stuff, because I did used to do that. Having done the optimization and the console ports, that there is a difference between a nice asset and a game-ready asset. And like coming back to the wireframe thing, absolutely show your wireframes. I want to see that your text cell density is correct. I want to see that this, this isn't going to annoy your technical director if it goes in the game and it's 5 million polys for like a potato on the ground. So yeah, that is important to show, and showing that and evidencing that you are aware of the technical limitations of games, and like the gameplay is always king, particularly doing environment art. Or UI UX as well. Like you can make the most beautifully animated button in the world, but if it slows down like menu load time, that's going to annoy players, and that drives down your UX. It makes the game not fun, quite frankly. And yeah, that is all very important to show.
Gary?
I mean, I've touched on this a little bit, but one shot that's clearly from the tutorial that your lecturer gave you, one that's a group project that you worked on and you've done the VFX for, and then one other, which is your final project, and then maybe, as I said, a JRPG, big swirly effect. And I'm like, okay, yes, this is a student who's not really thinking outside of the coursework and putting the effort in. I want to see, even if it's maybe not up to the quality of some others, I want to see that you've done something on your own back, or you've volunteered to work with another group. My last junior was off in the holidays, met a group online, and they did their own set piece with special effects and environment art and stuff, and then presented that, and then write it up. Make sure I know that that's where it was done, not just in the classroom.
Thank you. And on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to thank the panel for that very insightful aspect to art and all the branches involved in it. That was really brilliant, thank you. So a round of applause for the panel. Thank you.